Commission has released its annual report on trends in human rights violations in South Africa. Joining us now to talk more about the International Human Rights Day and what it means for us here in South Africa is Gershwell Brooks. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to the programme.
Good afternoon to you, Pete.
All right, so this report comes out once a year and gives us an opportunity, I guess, to take a pulse of some of the issues that are plaguing South Africans. We have a great constitution, people admire it, but sadly there are still shortcomings in terms of human rights. Take us through in broad terms what this report has found this year.
Sure. So, as you correctly stated, the Trends Analysis Report that the South African Human Rights Commission releases annually, it really looks at all the complaints that we have received for a particular financial year. The financial year in question is the 2016-2017 financial year, and what it focuses on then are the complaints that we received both from our provincial offices as well as our legal services unit at head office. Again, we find that equality is by far the highest basis of complaints. So if you had to break down the Constitution or the Bill of Rights specifically into different rights and right categories, again we find that equality is the highest, race being the highest category or subcategory within equality. Although there has been a slight drop-off in terms of the number of equality matters as well as matters based on race that have been reported, but it's still exceptionally high as compared to other categories.
So that's quite remarkable because, you know, if you were to take the temperature on social media, you'd think that racism has gone through the roof. Are we saying that either people are reporting it less or that perhaps that there's a trend suggesting that it is not as rampant as it was a year ago?
I think that the debate around how rampant it is or how regularly we see, the typical question is, are we more racist? And it's a very difficult question to answer from that perspective. What we are seeing though is that obviously more and more people are reporting it, although as I said there was a slight drop off in the 2016-2017 financial year when it comes to equality based complaints specifically related to race. But it does show that there is a greater number of people coming through complaining generally to the Commission, referring matters generally speaking to the Commission, which is a great indication of the fact that people are becoming rights aware. I mean, we've seen that there has been a slight increase in socioeconomic rights and concerns around socioeconomic rights such as healthcare, food, water and sanitation, which again indicates that people do not just see the South African Human Rights Commission as a policing instrument for racism, but that it broadly, that we are mandated to protect, promote, as well as monitor the attainment of the rights within the Bill of Rights, broadly speaking, all of the rights within
All right. We'll talk about the socio-economic aspects just now. Again, back to equality. If we take racism out of the equation, what other issues around equality are being reported on? I would imagine gender might be one of them.
So because there is, the Commission doesn't deal with many matters related to sex and gender, and that is because we obviously have the Commission for Gender Equality, which is another Chapter 9 institution which is specifically established to look at gender and sex. But we do see that there is definitely issues around sexual orientation, disability, or at least discrimination on the basis of equality, the subcategory being disability, is still also of concern, and we see it increasing slightly in that space as well.
All right, socio-economic, tell us about some of the more common complaints that people are bringing to your Commission.
So one of the things, and it's more current and rather than specifically focused on the 2016-2017 financial year Trends Analysis Report, is, for example, water and sanitation, and the big case is obviously the VAL, which is a little more current. But we see that water and sanitation is definitely a concern. Access to water, simple as that. Second to that, access to clean drinking water, because just because there is a body of water that people can access does not mean that it's clean and healthy for them to consume. Some of the other concerns also relates to healthcare. In the healthcare sector, there is definitely a lot of concerns, and we've been doing a lot of work in that particular space all the way through.
What are they saying? That the hospitals are substandard, they don't have facilities close by? What sort of complaint?
So it's a broad spectrum, all the way through from the oncology crisis that we've obviously had in KwaZulu-Natal, through to individual ad hoc cases where people haven't received the service that they require. Alternatively, where you see a healthcare system within a particular area that, for argument's sake, can be said to be falling apart. So those are some of the biggest concerns that people have.
And I guess with the listeriosis, food must have been one of the areas.
I should say, I mean, that was like something that the Commission didn't have to deal with all that much, because obviously the Department of Health had actually stepped in there and done what was necessary. But in terms of food, when we talk about food, it's also access to nutritious food. And that is a serious concern in South Africa, where we have a high, despite the fact that we are a food secure nation, yet a net importer of food. The fact of the matter is far too many South Africans are going to bed hungry on a day-to-day basis. So that will obviously also be something that is of serious concern to the Commission.
So take us through some of the trends you've seen, let's say over the past 5-6 years. What's changed over time in your view, or is it the same things over and over again?
It's interesting that you're asking that question, because this trends analysis report is actually a snapshot of the last 5 financial years, because it consolidates all of the 5 financial years where we have been releasing the trends analysis report. And as you correctly pointed out, we don't see too many changes in terms of the trends. I mean, there's obviously an upward and a downward movement in certain spaces, whereas we saw a massive increase in race-related complaints based on equality. In the last financial year, the last trends analysis, we've seen a slight decline, but there has been a steady increase nonetheless. As compared to when we started off. I think the one trend that's very clear is that the South African Human Rights Commission clearly has done a lot in terms of accessibility and making people aware of where we are, who we are, and what we do, because we're seeing a general increase in the number of complaints that we're receiving. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're seeing greater and more human rights violations, but you see a greater awareness amongst people to bring those matters through to the South African Human Rights Commission for appropriate redress, and that's important.
Okay, perhaps unfairly, who's the biggest perpetrator? Who's most responsible? And is this something that you're able to manage? So if it's government, are they addressing it? If it's individuals, are we finding there's some kind of movement in trying to deal with these issues?
I mean, the one thing that we've seen is that, through alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, which we also report on in the report, as opposed to just pure litigation, we find that we're able to address the complaints that we receive from all sectors. So whether it is government, whether it is individual-based, we are able to better deal with it. Why? Because it's cheaper, as you would imagine. We don't have to go to court. It's also quicker, because you're not at the mercy of the courts to finally hear your matter. And then that is why it's difficult to pin it down to one specific group and say that the biggest perpetrator is government in this particular space. But local government does need a lot of attention. We need to look at it, and I think that always comes through, whether it is us as a Chapter 9 institution or another Chapter 9 institution being the Auditor General or the Office of the Public Protector. Unfortunately, you'll find that the common denominator all too often is local government.
All right, so people wanting this report, they can go onto your website, I hope?
Yes, directly. All that you do is you go to the website www.sahrc.org.za. You go to the publication section and you'll see all the various publications we have. The Trends Analysis Report is available for download for free.
Gershwell, thanks very much indeed. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much. All right.